Hello, everyone. Welcome to Science of the Times. I'm Syma.
And I'm Tim Colson.
So, Tim, how have you been?
Yeah, not bad. We've just been over on holiday to South Africa to the Kruger National Park on safari, and it was a fantastic, a really relaxing break and away from email and what have you. So it was, but of course, I missed podcasting with you.
You sounded sincere for about a microsecond then.
And how about you? What are you up to? I think you're in Southampton at the moment.
I am right now, but I've been away. I've also been away. I was in Florence for a few days just for a break, and that was good too. And now I'm back at my old workplace here at a conference, which is really good fun.
No, well, that's good. So I'm really excited about today's guest. He's called Adam Becker. We'll get him to introduce himself. But he's a physicist by training and also did a bit of philosophy. And he's written this amazing book that has only recently come out, which is called More Everything Forever. And it basically starts from a bit of dodgy science and some dodgy philosophy, brings in some of the richest people in the world, including the richest person in the world, Elon Musk, and about how they think they want to shape humanity. It's just an astonishing story.
Astonishing, frightening, and compelling all at the same time, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, without any further ado, let's get him on and
Sure.
start chatting to him. Welcome, Adam, to Science of the Times podcast. I wonder if you could just sort of say a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself.
Sure thing, and thanks for having me. I'm Adam, and I'm a science journalist and author with a PhD in astrophysics.
Fantastic, and congratulations on your latest book that's just come out, More
Thank you.
Everything Forever. We'll put a link in the notes below so people can go and buy it. Thoroughly recommend it. I mean, you start talking about exponential growth, and then you kind of move on to talking about a philosophy called effective altruism and how this has sort of kind of largely consumed some of the tech bros and the immense wealthy in Silicon Valley. And I have to say, thank you for reading some parts of the web that I think I'd probably rather have not dived into.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely a lot of that for this book. So yeah.
So
So, Adam, how did you? I'm intrigued. So I've been, I'll admit I haven't yet got all the way through the book yet, but I've been reading
Okay.
around it too. How did you get into this, get interested in this topic in the first place?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the broader and shorter answer is that I have read a lot of science fiction my entire life and, came across a lot of these ideas like space colonization and the singularity and super intelligent AI, just from reading a lot of science fiction and being on the internet a lot growing up. And then as time went on, I saw these ideas being taken more and more seriously by, powerful people out here in the San Francisco Bay Area where I live, and thought, oh, this is not good. um, the somewhat more involved answer is that which is part of how I got on the track of writing this book specifically, is that I was asked to write for an online magazine called Inference. That at first they said all and did all the right things. They offered me money. They said, you can write thousands of words on basically any subject you want. And when I looked at the website initially, it looked fine. But when I did a little more digging, I realized there was a serious problem, and that what the website was doing was publishing perfectly good, or at least seemingly, pretty good articles about real science side by side with articles promoting creationism and, and saying that climate change wasn't real and that kind of nonsense. And when I went digging to find out who was funding them, I found out that all of the money was coming from Peter Thiel.
no, so just taking a step back for our listeners, they
Yeah.
can you explain what the singularity is and this sort of, this
Yeah.
incredibly and intelligent artificial intelligence that some of the tech bros believe is just around the corner.
Yeah, absolutely. So The idea of the singularity is basically that there's an exponential trend in the history of technology and, some singularity people claim even in the history of, biology and cosmic evolution before that. And that this trend is leading to a point in the near future where technology will just continue to improve upon itself. Better technology will lead to still better, which will be even better, and so on and so forth, until society is just completely unrecognizable, and we can, as a species, have godlike powers of creation and destruction and transformation. And the specific technology that's pointed to as like the real driver here is artificial intelligence. The idea that you get an AI that's about as smart as a human, and then you just run it fast, and so it can get it can do human quality work of 50 years worth of human work in a year, and then it designs an even smarter AI, which designs an even smarter one, and so on and so forth, until you have a godlike AI with these powers of creation and destruction and transformation.
So
Actually,
I did
so
ask,
did they?
sorry,
Sorry.
Sam, I just say I did ask ChatGTP after reading
Yeah.
that bit of your book to create me a more intelligent AI, and it did.
Amazing.
Sorry, Simon. Yeah.
No, I just want to say the idea here is that there's just an exponential growth. It just keeps going and going.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And as scientists, we know that the one thing that's always true about exponential growth is it stops. It can't last. The most like well-known popularizer and promoter of the idea of the singularity, Ray Kurzweil. Um, he has an example in probably his most famous book, The Singularity is Near. He says, people underestimate exponential growth. If you have, uh, if you have like a pond covered in lily pads and they grow exponentially, the number, the amount of the pond that they cover doubles every single day. Then and the pond is completely covered on the 30th day. Then on what day was the pond half covered? And the answer is the 29th day. But what he fails to mention is yes, and on the 31st day they don't double anymore
Yeah.
because the pond is covered and there's nowhere else for them to go. So this is it's just drawing out these trends and saying, oh, these will continue forever. And the one that Kurzweil leans on the most is Moore's law, which, depending on who you ask, either has ended or is in the process of ending right now.
Yeah. And of course, it was Malthus, probably Thomas Malthus, a couple of hundred years ago, who was the first to point out that exponential growth doesn't continue forever. So why do they believe? I mean, where would, how does this all then affect, link to effective altruism for our readers? And Simon, I'm pretty sure you'll realize that effective altruism is a philosophy that was actually dreamt up at our university. And I haven't met any of the guys responsible, but it's intriguing. Well, would be one way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, I did visit Oxford in the research for the book,
Oh,
but yeah, back in what 2023. Um, but yeah, the idea with effective altruism is that it's one of these things that sounds pretty good until you drill down into the details. The devil is always in the details.
Yeah.
Uh, it's the idea that let's do the most good that we can in the world by finding the most effective ways to make charitable interventions in the world, and find the most effective charitable causes and donate as much money as possible to those causes. Um, Roughly,
That
that's
sounds
the
great,
idea.
right? I mean,
Right, exactly.
yeah, that bit sounds good.
yeah.
Yeah, that sounds good. Problem is, what do you mean by good? What do you mean by the most good? Why, what about problems that can't be solved by charitable interventions, made by nonprofits, right? Like, affecting systemic change. How did you make the money that you're donating? Are you causing more harm than good? Uh, and of course, all of these are, essentially forms of long-standing philosophical chestnuts that have been debated for hundreds, if not thousands of years by philosophers the world over. And and there are good reasons for that. It's not that philosophers are stupid people. It's that these are extraordinarily difficult questions that in general do not have, like, that it's not possible for them to have simple answers. Um, Effective altruism says, well, but what we can do is we can apply the logic of economics to, say, okay, this is how many lives are saved by various charitable causes. And so we find the charities that are the most effective at saving lives, and then we donate to those charities. And while it's certainly true that it's a good idea to donate to charities that, say, combat tropical diseases in the developing world, it is not the case that that is the best thing that you can do with your money, especially when you start asking questions like, okay, why is it that there's this massive inequality in the wealth and power of people in different parts of the world? You can't solve that problem with malaria nets, and it is a massive injustice. And that's not where effective altruism stops. Effective altruism also says, okay, well, what about existential threats? And what about the long-term future? And so there's a branch of effective altruism called long-termism, where they talk about the long-term future of humanity and say, okay, there's going to be many, 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 many more people who live in the future than live now, maybe. And we have to consider, the moral, we have to consider the impact of our actions on them, which, again, considering the impact of our actions now on people in the future sounds good. And again, the devil is in the details. And so they say, they take a very utilitarian approach to ethics. And so they say, oh, the more people there are living lives that are at least barely worth living, the better. And so we should try to make the future as big as possible. And so this leads, one of the leading effective altruists and long-termists, Will MacAskill, to say that there is a moral case for space settlement.
Right.
And it also means that they focus on threats that they deem existential to humanity. Again, good to focus on existential threats, but first of all, not to the exclusion of all else. And second, what counts as existential? Yeah. And also, how do you determine which threats are the most pressing? The effective altruists, after sitting and thinking about it for a while, have decided that the most pressing existential threat is that of super intelligent godlike AI trying to wipe us all out. One of the other leading effective altruists, another guy at Oxford, Toby Ord, has said that the threat of that is 50 times greater than the threat of climate change and nuclear war combined. Yeah, and when I asked him why, his answer was essentially, I made up that number by thinking about it a lot.
Wow, it's a very I guess it's a very egocentric way of doing things, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's very one of the common threads throughout my book with all the different groups I look at, the long-termists and effective altruists, but also these other groups, the rationalists, the effective accelerationists, the tech billionaires themselves who fund all these groups. One of the things that they all have in common is a great willingness and even eagerness in some cases to, discard previous expertise and previous work done in the areas that they supposedly care about and say, no, we know how to do it best. And so we're just, not even going to look at all the prior art in the area. We're not even going to look at what experts in these other areas have to say. Maybe we'll talk to them, but we're just going to give that lip service. We think we're smart enough and clever enough, and our approach is revolutionary enough that we can just reinvent the wheel on the fly if we missed anything important.
So it's kind of a really interesting how this all took off because, you have a kind of flawed bit of science that exponential growth can go on forever. You have a philosophy. I mean, people come up with philosophies the whole time. Will MacAskill and Toby Ord, probably pretty good philosophers for all I know. But how did the super wealthy get involved? Yeah, no, yeah. How did the super wealthy get involved? I mean, we ended up, with Sam Altman getting involved. We had
Yep.
the crypto guy went to prison getting involved.
Yeah, yeah, Sam
How did all
Bankman-Fried.
that
Yeah.
happen?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then you've got Dustin Moskovitz giving
Yeah.
enormous amounts of money to the effective altruists. You've got Mark Andreessen aligning himself with the effective accelerationists, who we haven't even talked about yet. But yeah, 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 totally. I mean, Elon Musk said that effective altruism is a close match for his philosophy. And certainly he has pushed space colonization over and over again in, flying in the face of all of the very good reasons why space colonization is a bad idea that won't work.
We'll come on to that in a
Yeah,
bit.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. But how do the billionaires get involved? Well, I think some of it goes back to the thing I was just talking about discarding expertise, and some of it goes back to the other thing I was talking about with effective altruism in particular, which is also true of many of these other groups, that it's not very interested in looking at large systemic problems and how to solve them, right? So all of these ideas are actually very friendly to billionaires, right? Because at no point do you see, the big name effective altruist saying, oh, what's a major existential threat to humanity? Billionaires. I would argue that billionaires are like not the biggest threat to humanity right now, but certainly on the list alongside climate change and nuclear war, and interact with those two as well, right? They're not independent threats. And certainly with climate change, where a lot of the problem is vested financial interests from extraordinarily wealthy and powerful people being extremely difficult to dislodge from our politics. And so even though we have much, though not all of the technology that we need to address climate change, we have not been able to do so as effectively as we'd like, as effectively as we need to really solve the problem because of the ultra wealthy ultimately. And so, they are a serious threat to the stability and well-being of human civilization and possibly the continuation of the human species. That is not something that any major effective altruist has ever said, and instead they get funded by these billionaires, right? Because if your view of how to do the most good in the world is to, donate large sums of money to various causes, that's very friendly to the existing financial order. And it also means that, like there's this idea in effective altruism called earn to give, where you earn the most money that you can and then give enormous amounts of it to various charitable causes, and it means you have a huge impact on the world. And it's certainly true that you can have a big impact on the world by donating large amounts of money to charitable causes. But how did you make that money in the first place? Dustin Moskovitz, the biggest funder of effective altruism today, made his money by being one of the first people at Facebook, one of the co-founders of Facebook. Facebook is one of the companies directly responsible for the erosion of democracy and the difficulty that the world has had in addressing problems like climate change.
Yeah.
And so to argue that even if all of his money was going to wonderful causes, and even if you put us, which it's not, and even if all of the money was going, if he had a good system for democratic accountability about where the money was going, which he doesn't, we have a better system for that than, making large philanthropic donations by billionaires called taxation. But even if all of that was true, the benefits aren't worth the cost.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, again, not something that any of these people talk about.
I guess from their perspective, it doesn't work to talk about it, right? Because it creates a very top-heavy kind of world, right? There's the billionaires, and I guess implicit within that is the higher performing individual as well, right? That kind of
Yeah,
has a godlike complex and looks after the rest of the world.
right. And this is another reason why the billionaires like all of these different ideas, not just effective altruism, but, just like these ideas of perpetual growth and whatnot, that, it promises a world where there can always be billionaires, a world where they can always be on top, and it reinforces their sense that they know best, that they got their money not through some sort of quirk or accident of fate, which is, of course, how money, actually accumulates in the world. Like the people who are ultra wealthy, the overwhelming dominant thing that determines pretty much everyone's place in the socioeconomic spectrum is luck, not hard work or intelligence. But I mean, not that hard work and intelligence have nothing to do with it, but that luck is the single most important factor. And especially when you get at the very high end of the scale there, Silicon Valley and most venture capital, most venture capital things operate as a giant casino, right? Where, you're at the slot machine, and if you're just in the right place at the right time, you get a massive payout. But of course, the billionaires don't see themselves that way. They see themselves as uniquely intelligent. They see their money as proof of their unique intelligence. They see their unique wealth in the history of humanity as proof of unique intelligence in the history of humanity. And that means that they can ignore expert opinion, that they can just reinvent the wheel on the fly, and that really democratic accountability doesn't matter because they know best.
So it's no surprise they're not supporting charities that are pushing for greater equality, even though people like Peter Turchin have shown that collapses of civilizations typically follow a huge increase in inequalities.
Yeah, exactly. But the good news is that also sometimes a huge increase in inequality is followed by a correction of some kind, right? We had here in the US, we had massive wealth inequality in the late 1800s in the Gilded Age. Yeah. And then that was followed by the Progressive Age, where, among other things, the income tax was put into the US Constitution. And that's a cheerful thought, I think.
So let's move on. I mean, so why can't we colonize the galaxy? As kind of Musk and people. So let's come back to the sciencey bit of it now.
Yeah.
Musk kind of wants to go over to Mars. He wants to take his drilling equipment, take 1 million people there to live underground. Some people have argued that all of his businesses are kind of pointing towards setting up a colony of 1 million people on Mars. And then that's that gets through the sort of one of the Fermi, what are they called? The Fermi,
the great filter, the great Fermi paradox.
Fermi filter that we're then we live on 2 planets, and then the galaxy's the next step. So tell our listeners why that's pie in the sky and largely a load of bollocks. Excuse my language.
Yeah, no, totally. That is, we don't have enough time for me to answer the question in full. So I will give you a short version of some of the reasons why that's not happening. Because you're right, Musk has said explicitly he wants 1 million people on Mars to serve as a lifeboat for humanity in the event that, there's a catastrophe here on Earth, like a giant asteroid strike, like the one that killed off the non-bird dinosaurs 66 million years ago. And he says he wants that by 2050. Certainly not happening by 2050, but also it's not happening at all. And here's why, or here's part of why. It's essentially because Mars is absolutely terrible. Okay, the radiation levels are too high, the gravity is too low, there's no air, and the dirt is made of poison. And sorry,
I said 3 good reasons.
Yeah. Wait, 3? I thought that was 4.
I think that's more.
Yeah.
Yeah, 4.
That's okay. But yeah, I mean, he wants to protect humanity in the event of an asteroid strike here on Earth. More asteroids strike Mars than Earth. It's closer to the asteroid belt. There's no atmosphere to speak of, less than 1% of Earth's atmosphere, and that's part of what protects us from asteroids. It also protects us from radiation. If you want to look at the single worst day of complex life on Earth, that was the day that the asteroid hit that killed off all the dinosaurs except for the birds. That wasn't the worst mass extinction in Earth's history, but it was the single worst day because the other mass extinctions weren't in a single day. I mean, both of you are biologists. You know more about this than I do.
I'm a biologist and Simon's a biochemist. Yeah, but yeah,
Okay.
you're absolutely right. That is the worst day
Yeah.
ever for complex life on Mars, on Earth. You're absolutely
Yeah, exactly. That day, an asteroid, miles and miles wide, smashes into the Yucatan with, something like 100 times faster than a passenger jet, really, really fast. Almost smashes all the way through the Earth's crust to the mantle. Ejects enormous amounts of material out into space. Some of it ends up on the moon and is probably still there. A lot of it ends up re-entering, causing this pulse of heat as all of that material re-enters the atmosphere, and that cooks a significant fraction of all life on Earth just with heat just in that day, and it causes widespread firestorms. And then there's all of the material ejected into the upper atmosphere that cuts off sunlight for something like a decade, cuts the bottom out of the food chain. Something like 75 to 80% of all species go extinct, and 99.9% of all individual organisms die. It's really, really bad. And this happens, a lot of it happens just in one day. Almost all of it happens in 10 years. That's really, really bad. That day that all of that happened was a better and nicer and more hospitable environment for any mammal than the surface of Mars is or has been at essentially any point in the history of Mars. And we know that because mammals survived. There were mammals 66 million years ago, and they survived and were descended from those mammals. Any mammal then or now that was put on the surface of Mars without a spacesuit would die within minutes, if not seconds. Just the lack of oxygen and the lack of air pressure means that you would die by asphyxiating as the saliva boiled off your tongue.
Yeah. So
It
Mars,
is a phenomenally unpleasant place.
so Mars is impossible, but then other solar systems are so far away that even
Yeah.
like the fastest probes we've produced at the moment would take tens of thousands of years to get there, right? I mean,
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's right. Because Musk is right about one thing in that Mars is probably the next most habitable place in our solar system after Earth. And it's awful. I haven't even gotten into all of the reasons why. But the rest of the solar system is even more horrifying. And then, yes, there might be planets in other solar systems that are, more habitable, but we're not getting there because the closest other star system is a little over 4 light years away. And we're not breaking the light speed barrier. That's a hard and fast law of physics that has been tested extensively in the laboratory. Even if we come up with new laws of physics to supersede the ones that we have now, they are not going to find, the odds that we will find a practical way around the light speed limit are essentially zero. A lot of the history of science is not finding ways around other limits that we already knew about. It's discovering new limits that we didn't realize existed. There's no reason to think that new physics would make it easier rather than harder to even approach the speed of light. The speed of light limit itself is one of those examples. Newton didn't know that there was a limit at the speed of light. But yeah, and even just going near the speed of light would cause any little speck of interstellar dust to become a massive bomb, just due to its kinetic energy. And if it impacts your ship, it blows up. And we're not going to know enough about these distant star systems and their planets to be sure that it's okay to send people there in advance. The amount of time that it would take to get there if you don't go very, very close to the speed of light, or for really distant ones, even if you do go close to the speed of light, is such that, there would be generations passing in your ship, even, unless you go very, very close to the speed of light, and then you have time dilation, and then, it's hundreds of years for the outside world, but only, a few years for you. But then, like, how do you get that energy? You have the problem of massive, collisions in interstellar space. And if you don't have that, you need a generation ship. And then you have generations of people living and dying in this very small habitat without being asked whether they were okay with that. And you have the kinds of problems that show up in island biogeography, right? Where just, little bits of deficiencies in one or another substance cause massive problems for the ecosystem. And we as a species do not know how to build a completely self-contained ecosystem that would last for even a year, much less thousands of years or hundreds of years as you would need to go out into the universe. And that's not to say that we couldn't learn how to do that, but it is to say that, like, if that's the kind of thing that you need to do for something uncertain at the other end, when there is no reason to do it, no. And like, Musk likes to say that the sun is going to expand and become too hot. And in, 5 billion years, it's going to envelop the earth. And in about 1 billion years, even, before that, it's going to be too hot and the oceans will boil off. And that's all true.
Yeah.
What's also true is that the history of complex life on Earth is 500 million years.
And carbon dioxide is going to fall well before that point anyway. Plant photosynthesis will stop and life will go.
Exactly. Yeah.
Probably within 500 million years or so, right? Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And so then he would say, and that's why we need to leave Earth. And my answer is, look, you do not know what other things are going to happen between now and then that are more pressing. And we do know about one thing that's happening before then that is more pressing, and that's climate change. And solving that problem does not involve leaving the Earth.
Yeah.
And his companies are culpable in that problem. I mean, yes, Tesla has, these nice cars that don't emit carbon dioxide, and they do, have a nasty habit of killing pedestrians, but space, the carbon footprint of SpaceX alone is enormous.
So, Adam, I just wonder if you might just sort of in just a sentence or so explain to our listeners everything you've just said about convincingly about why we will not be colonizing Mars. Why doesn't he get it?
Because he doesn't want to. Because he thinks he's the smartest guy who's ever lived. Because he's the richest guy who's ever lived. Because it's not in his interest to understand that. There's an old saying, and I don't remember who said it. It's in my book, and I did quote him there, but I don't remember who it is right now. That is very difficult to get someone to understand something if their paycheck depends on them not understanding it. Now, Musk's paycheck doesn't depend on him not understanding this, but for him, there's more than a paycheck at stake. There's this whole messianic mission that he's on, this sense of purpose and meaning and direction that this thing gives to his life, this moral get out of jail free card that it gives him, that he can say, well, look, you can't criticize me or slow me down or get in my way or bother me with the petty concerns of individual people. I'm trying to save humanity. And, that's really important psychologically for him, it seems. And so if you said, oh, yeah, by the way, you're actually humanity's greatest enemy at the moment. That's not something that I think he's prepared to hear.
He probably also thinks, oh, I'm good at solving problems. We're good at solving problems. We'll solve these problems when we get there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's this idea that you can solve every single problem with technology.
Yeah. Exactly, which is the singularity kind of.
Yeah, exactly. And you can't. There are some problems that are fundamentally social and political in nature. And while the problems with colonizing Mars are, many of them are technological, some of them aren't. You would need to have 1 million people. If he wants to have 1 million people on Mars, you're going to put 1 million people in pressurized tunnels underground. Yeah. Good luck with that.
I'm not going.
Yeah. I mean, not only would it be hard to find 1 million people who want to do that, but also, the kinds of politics that would inevitably show up in there. There's this, very long-running sort of libertarian dream of escaping politics by going out and building, a new nation in the ocean, or colonizing, some part of the developing world where, there's not enough resources to fend off assholes like that. Excuse my language. Or going out into space, right? And you can't escape politics. Once you just have enough people in one place, there's politics. It just shows up. It's an inevitable part of the human, cultural process. And yeah, I mean, there's so many things like, here's another reason why you can't go to Mars the way that Musk wants to, that is sort of inevitably social and political and economic in nature. Musk has said not only does he want 1 million people on Mars, but he wants them to be able to survive even if the rockets from Earth stop coming. And that's why it needs to be 1 million people. But the best the best guess from economists, specifically Paul Krugman, about how many people you'd need in order to have a self-sufficient high-tech economy on Mars, and it would need to be high-tech because you can't be a hunter-gatherer on Mars. The best guess is somewhere between 500 million and 1 billion people. So 500 million to 1 billion people. And short of that, you just wouldn't be able to be independent of, high industry here on Earth. And so what that means is that if there were somehow a city on Mars with 1 million people on it, and then an asteroid was coming to hit Earth as big as the one that hit 66 million years ago, and you were given a choice and you said you have to do the thing that maximizes your chances of survival, stay here on Earth or go to the city on Mars, the answer would be stay here on Earth.
Yeah.
Because almost everyone here on Earth would die, but everyone on Mars would starve or asphyxiate or, die of thirst when the rockets stopped coming, because there would be no rockets coming from Earth for a very long time, if ever. And this also, there's, all of the problems as well that like are tied up in the term colonialism, right? They talk about colonizing Mars.
Yes.
And there is just this impetus to reinscribe all of the horrors of colonialism on the stars. One of the striking things that I discovered when I was writing this book was all of these, these people sort of carrying intellectual water for these billionaires like Kurzweil and the effective altruists and whatnot. They have done estimates of how many intelligent alien civilizations there are in the universe, and they all come out to the answer of none, other than us. And so that means that space is pretty much ours for the taking. And, putting aside questions like, what does it mean to be intelligent? Which, if you dig deep enough into that, just blows up the idea of, the super intelligent AGI explosion. Makes it clear that that's just not how anything works. Putting aside questions of, like, what right do we have to nature in that way? The justifications that they end up giving for this end up looking a lot like, well, we've figured out the universal evolution of all civilizations, or a universal moral calculus. And so that means that the fact that we don't see civilizations going and putting enormous megastructures around stars to capture their output and, colonizing the universe means that we're alone. And like, buddy, why do you think that every alien civilization would want to do that? Most humans don't want to do that.
So, Adam, we're running out of time, but I have one more question for you before we better wrap it up. Have any of the people that you wrote about in your excellent book, which again is called More Everything Forever, and we'll put details below, have any of them reached out to you or commented? There must have been one or two people who weren't entirely happy with what you were saying.
So far, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Something to look forward to.
Yeah, I expect that it's coming. But so far, no. There were people who, so the closest that I've come to having that happen so far, I mean, obviously, there are people who are unhappy with the book who've said stuff about that on the internet, but they're not the people I criticize in the book. They're just people who don't like the book for one reason or another. Usually because, they are the fans of Billionaires,
Yeah.
which one of my favorite tweets of all time was someone saying, "I can't imagine what it's like to be a fan of a billionaire. It must be like going to a casino and cheering every time the house wins." But um, but um, but no, the actual people who have written about in the book, the only pushback I've gotten from them, from some of them directly, happened when my fact checker reached out to them. I hired a fact checker for the book. Most books aren't fact checked. I wanted this book to be fact checked. I hired a fact checker with a grant that I got, and um, and the fact checker reached out to people I'd interviewed and some people who I'd written about who had not agreed to an interview with me or who I hadn't been able to reach, the way that a good fact checker will. And a couple of them said, "Oh, oh, this is ridiculous. You've gotten it completely wrong." And then, we're not able to support that claim generally. In one case, one of them pushed back, my fact checker asked, "Hey, what about this claim? What would you say to that claim?" And he responded, and I said, "Oh, that's a terrible response." And I just put it in my book.
Amazing.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you very much for joining us and taking the time to talk to us. I mean, it really is an amazing story how some very, very dodgy kind of claims are being made about,
Yeah.
about how we can colonize the universe and how effective altruism will solve everything in the singularity. I hope our listeners buy your book and read it because I just thought it was fascinating, really amazing. So thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for taking the time to join us, Adam.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you both so much. This was a lot of fun.
Wow, Syma, what an incredible story. Just astonishing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's mind blowing to be honest, and in a way, sort of the opposite of what we usually do, where we talk, about great science,
Yeah.
and here's a case where sort of bad science has been used to sort of seed or initiate some quite frankly bonkers ideas.
No, I know I love the way that Adam got so enthused about the impossibility of living on Mars. I mean, he's absolutely right. And a great question you asked is why does Musk think that it's achievable? I mean, would you go?
No.
No, neither would I.
I mean, I like the heat and, that's more than you do, but I'm not going.
No, I know. And I mean, I think that we could only scrape some of the surface of what he goes over in the book, but it is absolutely fascinating about how some of these rich people end up championing a philosophy which on the surface of it looks actually like a really sensible idea. Give as much money to charity, think about how that money is effectively spent. A great starting point, but they've kind of really hijacked that philosophy, which bits of it may not have been thought through quite as clearly as other bits of philosophy. But it's, yeah, an absolute fascinating story he tells. I know you haven't quite finished the book, but I
No.
mean, you're enjoying it, aren't you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I just keep going back to this idea of it's just mind-boggling. And I think maybe because we're not billionaires, it's sometimes difficult to get into that mindset. And he's done a good job of explaining, sort of both sides, how bonkers it is, but how they get to that point, right?
Yeah, no. Well, actually, that I really hope that our listeners enjoyed that,
Yeah.
and they go and buy the book because it is just gripping reading, gripping
And
reading.
I think also for our listeners, it's also important to understand that, bad science can also be used in a way that can sound convincing unless you really dig into it, right? And that can be really damaging.
No, exactly. And I mean, even the idea that exponential growth continue forever. I mean, obviously in your field, when you're looking at chemical reactions, as soon as the building blocks of those reactions are used up, it
Yeah,
stops. And in
that's
my,
right.
and in my world, populations, we're not knee deep in cockroaches because something stops them breathing
Yes.
forever. I mean, I mean, yeah, no, just, just astonishing, actually, just astonishing. Cool.
Great.
Well,
Well,
and next week, I think we will be talking about exoplanets, so continuing space. And we will learn that many of the planets that have been looked at through things like the James Webb Telescope are even less hospitable than Mars.
I'm not sure anyone's going to believe that's possible now after that description from Adam.
Well, enjoy the rest of your time in Southampton, and I'll see you soon.
See you back in Oxford. Bye.
Okay, bye.